Welcome. We'll go upstairs and talk.
During the pandemic, I spoke with Carol, socially distanced, at our offices in Washington, D.C. Carol is a champion of long-form documentary photojournalism. Her work focuses on humanitarian issues. She was a longtime staff photographer with the Washington Post. She became the first journalist to be honored with 4 Pulitzer Prizes. She won the coveted award twice for her work in Haiti.
This one, I've heard it described as devastation, obviously, but it's also hope, the holding of the hands. It's an image that tells a couple of different stories.
Yeah, that was the Haitian earthquake, and I had covered Haiti for decades. Literally, it was my second home. When I started at the Miami Herald, I worked for a biweekly section, and my coverage area was Little Haiti, which had grown into a community at that time. And then I sent myself to Haiti, and then I was just addicted to the people and the spirit, and but there was constant chaos and anarchy and trouble and natural disasters. So I was there probably more than I was home. But this scene was, after this horrendous earthquake, it was so hard to go back and see a lot of the places that I loved, trashed, but they were burning debris. People had been looting the marketplace, burning bodies, and I'm not necessarily an optimistic person in general, but people say they always see hope in my images, and I always feel like probably subconsciously I've looked for those glimmers of hope or, grace or kindness, even in the worst situations, and you always find them. There's always that, beautiful angel that swoops in and helps, or, this just little gesture, just holding something so natural, like, a couple holding hands, walking through this Armageddon scene. And it's their humanity. I mean, they haven't lost that. They may have lost everything else, but not that.
In 1999, Carol was in Kukës, Albania. At the time, tens of thousands of refugees from Kosovo were fleeing ethnic cleansing in their homeland.
I've heard you talk about this, and people look at this and have different impressions. As it can either be a sad story or a happy story, which when you look at this initially, you don't think that it could be a happy story.
Right, most people think it's horrible, but it's actually a joyous reunion. I mean, it was, again, in Kukës, it was the ethnic cleansing. It's horrible. History keeps repeating itself. The things we do to each other. But I had waited at the border and then followed this group that came to the camps, and a lot of the people would line up at this fence waiting to see if their relatives survived, for one thing, because a lot of people were killed. So they'd be anxiously waiting at the fence to see if they'd see anyone. And my gut instinct, for some reason, said to stay with this family. And I stood and waited, and there were people all down the line, but eventually they saw the grandparents and other relatives come, and there was such joy, and they were passing the babies back, him and a few other children. It was a few minutes of passing these children back, but it was such joy. And my friend and I that was covering it, Tom Hurst, he was a photographer too, he was next to the barbed wire, and we were both squished together to take these pictures. And that was one of those wow moments where it settled down for a second. We both put the camera down, looked at each other and said, wow, that was incredible. But we're right next to each other. We got slightly different images of this whole scene, but he was all bloodied from the barbed wire. So, but I followed them back. That's the family I went back to Kosovo when they went back, and they were more fortunate. They lived in Prizren, and all their family survived. Their house wasn't burned to the ground like most. So, and just recently, someone found him. He's still living in Kosovo. So, I've been thinking about doing follow-up stories on people that are in pictures that people remember, and to see what he's doing, what he did with his life. I don't know.
What about your life's journey? Because I know you had thought about art and being a nurse, and then tell us what it was that positioned you to become a photojournalist, do you think?
Well, I wanted to be an artist, but we were so poor. I mean, we had no car. My dad died. My mom worked in a sewing factory and, cleaned up in a bar, and she struggled. She struggled really bad. She only had an 8th grade education. And we had no car. We had an outhouse when I was a kid. I'll never forget, she actually finally saved up enough to have a bathroom put in this house, and it was all pink. Everything was pink, the curtains, the tiles, it was so pink. Until the day she died, I painted her nails pink. That was her favorite color. But yeah, we were poor, and I thought being an artist was definitely not a wise idea to be able to be self-sufficient. So I went to nursing school, be altruistic, but didn't feel right at all. I was petrified I was going to kill someone, so I took a darkroom class, and that's when a print came up in a tray, and it was like the defining moment of my life, the most magical thing I ever saw. I got my RN, I finished school, but I thought I could take a chance then with photography.
Carol was born into a working-class family in Pennsylvania. She was just 6 when her father died. That left her mother to support Carol and her older sister.
One of the things I like to do when I'm going to interview somebody, obviously, is dig deep, do research. And one of the things that jumped out at me about your life story that kind of mirrors mine, you lost your father when you were 6. My father passed away when I was 13 years old. And I thought about this because nobody knows that pain other than kids who've gone through that experience. But you also learn that life's not fair at a young age. And then you also learn about resiliency, because at some point you've got to pull yourself up and go on. And I think about all the things in your images, and they're all those things. Do you think it drew you to these kinds of stories?
Unquestionably. I mean, it's certainly colored my life. It's a huge, eternal hole in my heart. I mean, to be that young, I don't remember my dad, but I remember the night my mom came home and said he had died, and I was screaming and screaming and screaming, and then I shut down. I wouldn't talk about him for decades, actually. I mean, I just wanted to go right back to school. I compartmentalized it. I just couldn't handle it. It was so traumatic for a little girl, but in the end, I do believe it's probably what has given me a heightened sense of empathy. Perhaps, I don't know, when you go through something so hard such a hard loss at a young age, I think it gives you a better, deeper understanding for perhaps what other people are going through.
This empathy shows up throughout Carol's work. Take, for example, these photos, chronicling the people left behind in a psychiatric ward in Kosovo.
I covered ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and I went initially to Kukës, Albania, and covered the refugees flooding across the border, and then returned with the refugees when there was peace, so to speak. But this was an abandoned mental hospital, a psychiatric hospital in Kosovo, and everyone had fled when the Serbs left. And the patients were literally taking care of themselves, and they were really, it was like a Hitchcock movie. And you can't photograph smell, but I'll never get that smell out of my nostrils and my mind. I look at that picture and I could still smell what it smelled like, because there were feces everywhere. It was these poor people. They needed help desperately, but it was one of those prime examples that after we did the story, an aid group came in and cleaned it up and helped the people and brought nurses back. And so it was really, it felt good. It was horrible to be there and witness what these people were going through, but it was a positive ending at least.
And the impact,
power of the photograph.
Yeah, I was going to say, the impact of your image, that's got to be a good feeling.
Yeah. I think photos, there's always incremental, small changes as we, go through life, and I think images make a huge difference in just raising awareness and potential change. But that was one of the cases where it was immediate.
A photojournalist friend of mine, John McCusker, is down in New Orleans. He lost his house, through Katrina, and went through a lot of personal struggles and everything. And I remember him saying, at one point, you lift up that camera, and he goes, and suddenly it's like lifting a 57 Plymouth. It's really hard. And I'm just wondering if you ever had moments like that, where you're just kind of immersed. You're there for a long period of time, and you just see so much that it gets tough to lift the camera.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've had, a few meltdowns where, I mean, I think we all have a degree of PTSD just from what you witness. Doesn't have to be war. I mean, even just these incredibly intimate stories you do can take a toll emotionally. PTSD, I've struggled with depression my whole life. I mean, I feel like, especially in journalism, we're told to be tough, wear a mask, weeping is weakness, which is not. I've tried so hard to be open about it, and I've spoken a lot with presentations with students, and especially when I talk about being vulnerable, and it's okay to cry, and it's okay to embrace each other, and we don't have to be those walking robots with cameras. It resonates so much with them, and they've come up and hugged me afterwards and were crying, say thank you for telling me I could feel. I have all these editors saying I got to be tough, I got to be objective, I have to do this, I have to do that, and we're emotional beings, of course we're going to feel, and I'm just hiding it as I did with when my dad died doesn't help. It hurts. So I'm so hoping that at least I could have a little bit of the courage of all these people I photographed my whole life to be open about that kind of stuff and maybe help someone along the way.
Carol won the 2009 Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award for domestic photography. Her project focused on a woman taking care of her sister who had Alzheimer's. This is a story that's deeply personal for Carol.
This is, I think, the first time I was introduced to your work. Talk to me about how that assignment came about. What was it like? Because, I mean, just the imagery and what you had to go through. I mean, you were basically a fly on the wall, but you were going through some tough stuff there.
Yeah, it was, and that was at the time where my mom was spiraling really bad into Alzheimer's. My sister eventually got early onset. This horrible disease, but it started as an assignment for the Sunday magazine at the Post, just to follow a healthcare aide around for a day, which I did. And as soon as we walked into this room this is Miss Classy, Classy Morant, she was 104 years old, taking care of her bedridden sister, Rosie, who had Alzheimer's. She was really, really in need of intense care, and all she had was a little bit of help from an aide that came, occasionally, and her neighbors, but mostly Miss Classy did all the care. I mean, she was a dynamo. She was incredible. So I went back and just basically moved in with her, pretty much. I mean, I was there constantly, and she became like my Grammy, but I was with her when Rosie died, and through the funeral, and then the paper, I was going to write the story as well, but the paper, they said, enough, it's over, this is the end of the story. I tend to stay way too long on stories, but, well, according to them, I did. But I said, no, I think Classy still has more to teach us. And because I knew it was like a little elderly couple, she would probably go downhill too, because her purpose was over. That was her purpose, was to make sure Rosie died at home, in her own bed, and she had, a really healthy attitude about death and, dignity and family and devotion, and so I stuck with her. In fact, Michael Dussel was my editor at the time, and I remember he kept saying, "No, it's over, Carol. Let it go, and I'm like, "No," and they finally said, "All right, Carol, I trust you." And it's the first time I think any editor had ever said, "I trust your instincts," and he let me stay through it, and things changed with the story. And with Classy, and the way I wrote it ended up being completely different from it became a first-person story, and I wove in a lot about my own mother and Alzheimer's and loss, and eventually Miss Classy passed. I was there when she died too. Took her last breath. It's really weird photographing the light leaving someone's eyes. You can't. It's such a profound moment, But I got such an avalanche of response from this story, a lot from the writing. I mean, it was hard to photograph because it mostly took place in this one room, pink wallpapered room where they both slept. So it was very hard visually to document it, but the words, for some reason, they resonated with so many people. In fact, still today, I have people messaging me saying, "I kept that Sunday magazine, I just lost my whoever," and they'll think to message me and say, "This still moves me. I read the story again," and it was just, it's She was my hero. I mean, she became like my Grammy. I miss her every day. I could still hear her voice and her peach cobbler, and yeah.
You talked about the human condition, and you've seen these poignant moments, which we've looked at. You've seen moments of hope, but you've seen the cruelty of mankind. What are the lessons, I mean, that you kind of take away from what you've seen through your career?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of times you want to just beat your head against the wall or put the camera down. Or sometimes it gets really frustrating seeing what we do as a species to each other, to the earth, to the environment, to animals. I mean, I love animals as much as anything in life. And yeah, it gets really hard, but I feel like, you know, it's kind of a mission. It's like if I document it, if I show people, maybe something will change. You hope, one hopes. It can be discouraging, but if you let it get you completely down, you can't lose hope. You know, I think if anyone loses hope, or if I lose hope, even as a journalist, you know, to document, it's why are we doing it? So there's always hope. Actually, what I've been doing during COVID, my lungs are really bad, very high risk, so I haven't, the first half of this year, I didn't leave the house except for the grocery store. I mean, I was so petrified. I've had chronic problems, so, but I started photographing little things in my yard, little nature, you know, my flowers that I love, my plants, little creatures, and it's just been so refreshing. It's like my therapy to photograph just beauty, just these tiny little miracles of beauty where no one's screaming at each other, no one's beating each other up or killing each other. It's just pretty little things. So that's kind of been therapy for me. So I think no matter how, you know, what turns life gives you, you know, it's how you approach it that makes all the difference.
Many thanks.
Okay.